Okay. Um, it's Ganesh. Can you say it again?
It's Ganesh Chaturthi, which is like an honoring of Ganesh, or in the mythology of Ganesh, it's when Parvati, Shiva's wife, just sort of gave life to Ganesh. There's many stories to like Ganesh. Some people call it Ganesh's birthday, not necessarily, but maybe. But it's a very big holiday in India. It's a very big Ganesh celebration. Lots of places in India will have like like long parades carrying Ganeshas, and a lot of them are made out of clay. And when
Yes.
I was there, the first time in India, it happened to be in Ganesh Chaturthi, and we were watching like the locals taking Ganesh, many Ganesh, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if actually thousands, because in India, into the ocean. So they were actually walking as a procession and honoring and chanting Ganesh mantras and doing all these things. And then they were just releasing into the ocean, so that it was sort of like an offering to the divine, which is the ocean. But
Yeah.
it was beautiful. And just seeing all these Ganeshas. And so there's a lot of stuff happening right now, astrologically and spiritually and religious wise, things like that, which is never coincidental when these things overlap with each other.
That is right. That is right. Complete alignment and synchronicity. I was actually watching a show yesterday that was there was so much synchronicity. I was literally talking to God like, okay, all right, I get it. And so but
Yeah.
it was there. I'll tell you very quickly the name of the show. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Hulu called The Other Black Girl.
No.
Okay, it's like
Okay.
it's like um it's not horror, but it's definitely like it's not horror, it's like
Mhm.
horror-esque, if you will, but it's not it's it's satire, but it's not, it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out where I would place it in multiple genres, I think. But
Okay.
I think it's fun and
Yeah,
I laugh so hard.
that's
and
great.
um and then also there's like tragic, but it's also fun.
Yeah.
And but the one character who I love, she was just like, I thought we talked about the fact that there are no coincidences, there's no such thing as coincidence. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And so yes, when you're
Okay.
talking,
I'll have to check it out, put it on my list.
yeah, it's like it's all over the place. And so when you do, I would love to talk with you about it. I just want
Okay.
to hear other people's experiences. But all of that to say, I'm completely aligned with you on what is happening, I think, spiritually, cosmically, astrologically, meteorologically. like,
Yeah.
um, and seasonally as we're preparing for the equinox.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of feel like this rainy day is telling me and my body, come on, it's time to get ready. It's time to get ready for a new season. And
Yep.
so let's prepare,
Yep.
um, and not feel that shock. Although I really feel a shock coming into fall. I usually just really enjoy sliding into fall.
Hmm.
Um, and yes, astrologically, goodness, I at least when I listen to the multiple astrology
Hmm.
readings that I listen to weekly,
Hmm.
I'm always just like, oh, that just helps me so much in terms of my understanding of what is happening um, in my
Yeah.
mind, my body, my spirit.
Yeah. It's sort of like reading the forecast, right? I mean, just like any meteorologist, an astrologist is like a meteorologist, probably a little bit more efficient. But again, still there's room for error. And I think astrology does play a really great role in sort of like scoping out present and past and future stuff. But also what I think I really enjoy about it is or the inherent essence in understanding astrology is that we are given a certain level of responsibility that once we know this information, what do we do with it? Right? Because sometimes there are some people that like cling to it, and this is the word of God and all these
Mhm.
things, and people are only using astrology to read their day to day, and they're missing out on opportunities. I know people that are like, oh, the astrology says this, blah, 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 blah. And sure, but we also, one, have choice, and two, um, we have a responsibility to it, which is one of the reasons why I like Jyotish, which is the Vedic version of astrology, which is the most efficient, actually.
Hmm.
Um, and it doesn't just lay out the cards of where you came from, what's happening now, where you could go, but also gives you tools and responsibilities that you have to integrate into your lifestyle. Um, it's not just like, well, this is what's happening in my astrology. Well, this kind of sucks, and that's it. It gives you a lot of tools like do these prayers, do these mantras, wear this thing on a certain day, wear this color, wear this gem, do these particular rituals and on Saturday. Like, it gives you something to do to interact with the metaphysical forces that
Yes.
we are aligned with. We forget because we're so busy in our day-to-day four-sided box of this head. But when we can commune with nature, because historically all the indigenous cultures that still kind of hold true to these traditions, you know, we're practicing fire rituals. This is one of the primary things that was done for thousands of years. And,
Mhm.
tribes of different cultures, all different cultures around the world, and even just in India, but in Africa, but in South America, to like Native American, like fire rituals was like one of the apex pieces in all the traditions and treatments that they were doing. Treatments to the world, treatments to honoring the elements, treatments to honoring each other, to honoring spirit, all these things. And so there's a deviation from that. And now we
Yes.
have such superficial light that is the new sort of offering that we cater to, which is like the phone light, right?
Mhm.
And the laptop light and the light overhead. But we get so overwhelmed by these things without knowing that we are indoctrinated into these things.
That's
And
right.
then it's this deviation because of this that we lose touch with the essence of who we are, which was what connects us to nature, which is why when people go camping or they travel and see other like traditions and cultures, how involved other cultures are in the natural scenery of life. When
Yes.
you go to, say Costa Rica, there's a lot of life there. There's like palm trees that you're doing things with, and you're bananas, and you're going to Italy and you're getting all the freshly harvested foods, and then you're going to like Africa where they're cultivating the grains right there, and they're making the flour and they're churning the things, and it's like such a natural piece that we cannot abandon. But the more we abandon it, the more we get into like fast foods and processed foods and canned foods and boxed foods and all these things. We're like losing connection with the element,
Yes.
and the elements, because of that imbalance, are getting more volatile, and they're trying to
Mhm.
remind us, and nature will always win. you know
Always.
that's the thing. We want to control nature, and we have technology now that causes like weather changes. There's a lot of historical in past like 20 years, you know military using certain missiles or certain things to affect the chemistry in the atmosphere to cause rain, to create all these kind of like weather sort of like manipulated situations. And it's like, wow, we're trying to really manipulate what has already been perfected, that we have to just align with instead of think we can control it, and we become it. We're out of alignment with these things. And so Ayurveda is this thing, this basic science that's been around for over 10,000 years, that talks about these type of traditions and practices and rituals, and you know since time immemorial, and it encourages it. A lot of the basis for Ayurvedic management and treatment of things is getting back to nature, not creating an enabling system where like, here, take this pill and just keep going eating the crappy food that you're eating, and sure, keep staying up late, and sure, burn the candle from both ends. Ayurveda is not going to give you that pill to say keep doing what you're doing, and then you wonder 10 years now why you have some pathology growing. This is not how Ayurveda works,
That's
right?
right.
This is not and Ayurveda is the science of life. So it has a complete, full, thorough understanding of every single level of consciousness and how to apply the principles. That's how developed it is. And to the Western concept of medicine and science, oh, this is a lot of mystical stuff. And
Mhm.
well, when you can't understand something, you chalk it up to mystical, which is another way of sort of like poo-pooing it, or
Yes.
suppressing it, or oppressing it, or denying it, or removing it. And it actually reminds me of a story when I was in chemistry class for pre-med. um, my teacher and I were having this discussion because I was already an Ayurvedic practitioner. I wasn't a physician yet. Um, and we were talking about the law of thermodynamics and just all the different physics concepts and just like cause and effect and how things relate in the world and all of these things. And I said, and there's this also little space where science doesn't necessarily fall into as we know it.
Yes.
That can't always explain certain things. And he was like, no, I disagree. And I said, of course you're going to disagree. You're a chemist. This is what you do. When you see a surgeon, that's what they do. When you see a carpenter, that's what they do. When you're a chemist, this is what you do. And so about a month and a half later, this is how grace works, sometimes ferociously. He had to cancel class, I think, because he just had a life-threatening near-miss experience of dying because he was coming down from Northeast Philly on, I think, Roosevelt Boulevard. And he said that he was stopped at the light and then the light turned green, but something made him pause, not to proceed ahead. Like he was just kind of like delayed at the green light. And he said a car came running the light in the perpendicular direction, slammed into the bus stop and hit people. And he's like, if I had proceeded to move forward by 2 feet, I would have been part of that collision. And
Yes.
he was so shaken up. And he's a very brilliant man. I love him. And I said, so what is it in the science that you believe in that explains why you took that pause?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it. I
I
don't
was
want
like,
to talk.
welcome to my world.
Yes.
This is
Yes.
my science now.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we understand what happened.
Oh,
So this is very humbling. He was very humbled after that. He taught great classes, even more like connected to his humanity because he realized like I almost died. Something made me stop. I was like, yeah, it wasn't like calculating the angles and understanding like how much speed and velocity and where the energy is moving. You go, you don't. No, it was past all that.
there's so much that you just said that I know. We have like multiple strands of conversations. There's so
Oh
much
yeah,
wisdom.
yeah.
But the piece there's I'm gonna come back to um that is really resonant is the humility that you just spoke of, and um how Ayurveda, I think, and especially in my experience, how Ayurveda, and as you mentioned, I think many indigenous wisdom traditions, but when you have a science, a life, the science of life, right? Practice that has been around pre-Western medicine, pre-industrialization, right? Where um, these these roles or these professions were created, they were segmented, and the mind and the body and spirit were segmented, right? We have Cartesian thought and philosophy that also is segmenting and fragmenting, and then a capitalist structure that's creating these compartments that is telling us we focus on this one lens. I am a chemist, I am a scientist, and so this is their only way that I can make sense
Mhm.
of the world, and everything else is um, not even irrelevant, but possibly it's irrelevant in their realm, right, in their lane. And so when we think about the power that you hold as a physician, as a doctor, as a healer, but to say, I will see things in this lens. And so if it's not within this lens, then there are no answers that make sense or relevant
Mhm.
until that's blown up and something greater calls you into awareness that there is something much bigger than the science that was created by man,
Mhm.
human, um, and human beings, and then also specific human beings, right? Who decided what was the science that would be valuable, what would be the science that would be valid.
Mhm.
And as we think about, the patterns of colonization and how they have created those structures, it is just so, I think, especially in this time coming out of, where we're still in, right, pandemic phase, or we're
Mhm.
technically out of the pandemic, but where the globe, where the world has been humbled,
Mhm.
and where we were just talking about, climate catastrophe and
Mhm.
man-made climate catastrophe, because man has, right, human beings are making decisions, based on, the belief system that they are, um, more powerful, or have more wisdom than the natural world, than nature,
Mhm.
right? And so this humility, that exists within Ayurveda, within, I think, many, um, cosmologies, true cosmologies of care,
Mhm.
that come from indigenous cultures around the world, pre-colonial indigenous cultures around the world, um, that at the center, the ability to see beyond, one way, to see beyond, like, sort of the myopic
Mhm.
viewpoint of this science, or the science that has been deemed valid,
Mhm.
um, is is a pathway to healing on every level.
Mhm.
And that you would have to come, some people, right, have to come close um to death, or close to a death of some kind, hopefully an ego death of some kind, to get to the place of that kind of recognition. And I want to say, I am today years old, still learning, and you know this, and that's like, because you are both my doctor and my teacher. And so I just want to bring that all into light. Like, there was so much. I know I'm going to come back with a whole bunch of other things, but I just really like that, like, landed, um, so deeply. And part of the work that I've been doing, not part of the work, like, it's not my work, my labor, it is, my life system, um
Mhm.
and the transformation that I have been experiencing over the last few years, um really has been, um like, completely humbling experience every single day, um coming back and recognizing, um not that I don't know enough, but I'm remembering, right, the African indigenous wisdom in my body. I'm remembering through Ayurveda, that it has been a pathway, to, um, my complete life's transformation. And when I think about the work that I've been doing, through my coaching practice, and also my facilitation, and the work that I do, um, or that is specifically related to, healing the body and the mind, in and spirit collectively, and healing our relationships with systems of destruction and extraction and exploitation, um, like racialized capitalism, right? Colonial capitalism. Um, and so in my practice, in my life practice, there were so many ways for many, many years that I was out of alignment.
Mhm.
And so my focus was as a laborer, right? If I really, like, sit with it, I love that I was just listening to, there was another talk that I was listening to recently, and we were talking about Costa Rica, and there's this wonderful group of Black women that run this organization called the Exodus Summit, and they're basically supporting Black women, mostly here in the continental US,
Mhm.
um, to exit, to whether you decide that you want to, move abroad, permanently, short term, bop around, house sit. Like they're literally preparing people to move and transfer their lives, whether you're single, you're partnered, you have children, you have aging family members, you're a caregiver, etc. They're like, we are committed to helping Black women find their peace and wellness and well-lived lives outside of the United States.
Yeah.
And yes. And so I've been following them, probably for like very much aligned actually from when I started studying or researching Ayurveda at the very beginning of the pandemic. When I think my everything in my body was like, we got to get out of here. Where are we going? I don't know, but we got to get out. We can't go. I'm finally ready
I'm
to go. We can't
I'm done
go.
with this.
I'm
I'm done with
done.
this place.
But, but one of the things that they were talking, everybody's always not everyone. I sound like the internet, but essentially, they're when we're talking about places that could be desirable for I think many Black women, many Black people, many people. Period. For many reasons, Costa Rica is high up on the list. And when you talk about communing with nature, when I close my eyes and I dream about a place where I could be surrounded with life and verdant life, brilliant life, healthy, well life, I see Costa Rica, and I live in a treehouse, and so, but all of that to say, with Costa Rica, so they were talking recently, the women from this group from the Exodus Summit, I think it was Stephanie Perry, and she was saying she has a great YouTube channel, and she was talking about why you would want to leave the United States, and for people who are like, oh, why should I do this, or all of the reasons why they might not. She was like, the number one reason is that in the United States you are a worker before you are a human. Mm-hmm. Period. You are a worker before you are a human. And that the way that lands in my body is like a brick in my stomach, and then like something sharp in my heart. And there's also, I think the brick is kind of like, yeah, I know. Right. It was like, I already know that. So there's the shock kind of, it's not shock or surprise. It's like, I know that. I've known that. I knew that before I was here, that my ancestors know that, period. Being forced laborers brought here to this country. And then also my ancestors who forced them. So that's all in my DNA. And so in knowing that in my body, when I imagine reclaiming generational health and wealth and wellness, I have to believe that it's going to come from a life system that supersedes or preceded what has been constructed here. And that includes the Western medical system. Mm-hmm. So yes. I would just want to share that kind of as like the opening from my thinking, but you just like totally amplified so much of that.
Yeah. And a lot of what you said, there's a lot of different places that can be explored and different avenues to discuss different topic pieces. It's amazing. And yeah, I mean, so if we're tying it into like the perception and understanding of things per Ayurveda, we acknowledge an ancestral lineage. We actually have a word for it, which is called Pitriya, which is like ancestral lineage. And so when we're considering like, a person's current state of health, we're also looking at ancestral components, genetic lineages and things like that, because and in the Ayurvedic system, we know that there is, memory. Mm-hmm. And there's a collection of energy that happens in, the eons of time, that time itself is concept. When we think about it, just to define some particular experience that's happening in the universal consciousness. Universal consciousness will have this understanding that, there's a story that's playing out that's based on cause and effect, and Ayurveda calls that karna karya. So Ayurveda, Vedic philosophy, which is one of the, Ayurveda is one of the systems of Vedic philosophy, Vedic science. It has this complete understanding of just cause and effect and time and space and universal consciousness and the beginning of time, what that really means in that philosophy. And, and to bring it to the present moment, as humans, we're just sort of like little nanoparticles floating in time and space in this infinite body of wisdom that knows itself and knows that it's just doing a thing based on its own cause and effect relationships. It's an accumulation of memory happens. It's like when you put your hand over a fire, you'll feel the heat or you'll feel the burn, depending on how deep you put your hand in the fire. But next time you go next to the fire, you'll remember, even if you don't remember in the forefront of your consciousness, like, oh, I should not put my hand in the fire. Something inherently will go, don't do that. And, we can use that as a simple analogy to think when we're living a lifetime to lifetime, that there is a collection of energy that kind of pools somewhere. And how the configuration happens based on consciousness will develop into the human, and then depending on how it's connected to its historical context, that's what's going to be the content of the current times, right? And so we have to consider that, and then consider the most fundamental things in Ayurvedic perspective, like your parents and their lineage, and then that becomes part of your lineage, and then where are you growing up, your actual geography, and then what's the climate within your geography, and what season were you born, what time of year were you born, what time of day you were born. Like, these are so many different factors that have to be accounted for that we can't think of. We just do. We just are. We just kind of are doing these things, right? And again, if we want to live our day-to-day life, especially with the way the climate conditions are going, I mean, time is speeding up many ways for us as humans on this planet, with all the different global calamities that are happening, including all the environmental issues and all the weather patterns and things like that. And it's like we're out of balance with any of the offerings that we were offering, to remember that we are divine, part of the divine, and how are we communing with the divine versus separating from divine by putting all these things in place as mediums that think they're causing a bridge, but in other ways they're causing more separation, right? And the essence of all that is that we're losing connection with nature itself. We're not going to the woods enough. And if we're going to the woods enough, like I live by the Wissahickon, and I love the park and I love the trails, and I know seasonally, because I've been here long enough to know, like, when do I go, what time of day, what time of week, what time of month, to know what to expect. But in the summertime, there's so many gorgeous, like, little places to sort of picnic in Wissahickon, and they get so trashed,
Yes.
And I'm like, how I don't even understand that consciousness. But then I also understand that consciousness, because it's like, if you had that certain level of awareness, you wouldn't do that, right? It's like, when I see people outside in different neighborhoods just eat their something or drink their something and just open the window and toss it, like, I don't understand how you can do that. If I was to chew a piece of gum, the little wrapper would stay in my pocket until I found the nearest garbage pail. It's such an automatic reflex, I don't have to think about it.
That's right.
It's just like, how do I connect with nature? It's like, when debris floats around from when the garbage people pick up stuff, they're not the most organized. I think I would be a very OCD sanitation worker if I was a sanitation worker. I would take the trash, put it right in the thing. I would pick up anything that fell. I would put the garbage pail back where I picked it up from. Like, I would be
You would
yelled
probably
at.
get fired.
I'd be fired. I would be fired. They're like, what's wrong with this guy? And I wouldn't smell weird because I'd have scents. Anyways, but it's just kind of thinking like, oh, well, what do I do? It's like, I go out and I kind of clean up the local, like, the near properties and front lawns, and I just pick up the random things and just toss it, because it's like, that's my contribution, and so it's like, having the connection to nature, I think, is an important piece. And that's one simple part. So if you don't want to have a garden, or you don't have the capacity to have a garden, then at least pick up that one piece of something that you see. I know it's not yours, but it is, because we're still on this planet. That's like if you're living in a house with your family members, and your brother decides to throw something on the floor, you're gonna be like, well, it's his, I'm not picking it up. No, we live in his house, I want this house clean, I just throw it away, and I'll yell at him, but I will still throw it away and hope that next time he will be smart about it and do that. And then it's like, how do we start our day? It's like people start their days with listening to CNN and ESPN and all these catastrophic things first thing in the morning, right? The impressions of like the sun rising, creating a new day, a new dawn, a new freshness to the consciousness that we are given in this body. And we're like, oh, I need to go and put the news on and listen to Wall Street and all these things. And it's like, you're listening to all this stuff. It's an addiction, and this addiction to dysfunction. And you're not listening to the birds that are outside. You're not listening to like, the sound of the quietness, if there's an outside quietness. You're not listening to that, starting the morning with like your own breath, your own voice, your own prayers or something like that would start the day's intention. In my own personal practice for decades now, I never start the day without an intention, a prayer, a mantra, and going to my altar. I've had an altar since I can remember, like since I was 5.
Mm.
Except in undergrad, can really have an altar there. But I had an altar because even when I used to be a metalhead, I used to have a wall that I would dedicate to all like the different, musicians and things like
Yes.
that I loved. That was my altar. So I've had
Yes.
some sort of like focal point. This is what I believe in right now.
Yes.
Because I believed in nothing at that point. I believed in anger and hostility, and that was metal, heavy metal for
Mhm.
me. And but I've always had an altar, and it's always been my day. I always start my day with the altar. And if I'm like not next to my altar, then I might bring a portable altar when I travel, or I'll just
Mhm.
face the northeast direction because that's an ideal place to kind of like focus on the currents of like consciousness and Shiva and God, and focus and say like some prayers and mantras and just kind of do it however long or quick. I will always make that connection every day. I don't start the day without it. Even when I had COVID, I still would go to my meditation place and kind of just sit at the altar. I couldn't do a whole thing. I would just be like, I'm lighting these tea lights and the incense. I'm going back to the couch, but I still need to go there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, like, something that simple, and we don't have that anymore. We have it in really interesting ways or no way at all. The TV, the news, all these things becomes that replacement. But
Yes.
when you step out of these sort of cultural urban ways of living, and you're more in like nature, and you're more in the woods, you're more in those kind of places or retreat centers or whatever, you're reminded of those things. And why do people feel better just automatically without even taking a pill at that point in time? Because you're realigning with that. So this is even before needing to take a pill,
That's right.
you know
That's right.
and all the Ayurvedic medicines and Chinese medicine too. Like the Chinese medicines align with understanding like the different directions and the optimal sense of energy, and herbs and stuff like that. So, and Tibetan medicine and like Native American medicine, like all of this is taken in. There's no synthetic pills that are made, right?
That's
Taking in like there's a deviation from consciousness. What's one great contribution of Ayurvedic medicine with psychiatry, psychology, is the consideration that a lot of the mental health disorders are placed on the person that has it, but the society behind it doesn't take responsibility for co-contributing to that reality.
that's right.
The lack of connection to the community, that if there was a better community in place, that person, even if they had some sort of mental affliction that was karmically reincarnated within this present consciousness, the community would come together. This is why, like, when you go to Africa, they're talking about
Right.
the spirits. When you go to Native American tribal conditions, they're talking about spirits. When you go to like South America and shamanistic practices, they're talking about spirits. The Aztecs talked about spirits. Even like the Romans in their initial onset of development, which connected to like paganism connects to the spirits, Wiccan,
Right.
Celtic, like, so there is this wisdom that's still there, and this technology we have today brought us together in ways, but it's also disconnected us from nature, and that's part of the sin, right? Bloodshed. I remember I was talking to friends the other night about 9/11 because I was in New York when that happened, and I was not very far, and it brought up a lot of things for me. And I was in holistic school at the time studying shiatsu. The classes were canceled the day after because or the day of because that's when it happened. The week after, when we reconvened in class, the teacher, she was representing Japanese culture because shiatsu is Japanese predominant.
Mhm.
She was saying, she's like, in the Japanese culture, even in Chinese culture, bloodshed is considered one of the major sins, because bloodsheds of humans is considered one major sin. When you cause another human to bleed, that's a major karmic
Mhm.
um, negative consequence.
Yes.
right? And it's like, how long, how many thousands of years have we been shedding human blood, right? And a lot of the indigenous cultures do blood offerings, right? They've done blood offerings, and Western is like, oh, we don't do that because it's not appropriate. It's like, yeah, but you kill people with machine guns. What's
That's
more
right.
appropriate? What's more appropriate? And we're doing something conscious with a certain level of like committed choice, intelligent choice, like this is the offering because I want to be in alignment with nature and I'm doing this, you know. And I know there are some religious cultures that kind of think they're doing it in the same way, like bloodshed is in the name of some divine form.
Mhm.
Um, that's just a misdirection of intelligence, right? But we're
Yes.
looking at what were the offerings? What are our daily offerings? How are we offering our life to the divine as the divine is? It's this, keeping this commune kind of relationship, right? And then with each other, because if
The
you can't
sacred
have it
relationship.
with yourself, if you can't have it with yourself, of course you're not going to have it with others.
That's right.
If you don't give it to yourself, you don't have it to give, right? And if
That's
you're giving to others without giving to yourself, then there's something going on there that might not be 100% whole. It might not take away from the fact that you're trying to help someone and that's who you are, but to what cost, what the expense, what's your sacrifice? Is that the blood sacrifice you're doing? Is it sacrificing yourself? Because you shouldn't be the sacrifice, because how can you give more if you're sacrificing yourself? If you're throwing yourself under the bus, how many times can you do that before you lose yourself? Right.
mm, that I'm just going to say that part. How many times can you sacrifice yourself? Um, I think this is one of the seminal messages and lessons of my life. And I think that when there was so much, right? I think that we could play with and dig into some of the essence of what I heard, which I is deeply connected to my purpose and my mission, is really recognizing that sacred connection, sacred relationship. And I think the sacred, right, has been extracted from the culture, the monoculture that we exist here in the United States, and how that affects our wellness, our health, our labor, etc. The idea that we would not be in relationship with each other, like even as you talked about, picking up the trash. There is a communal practice. There's intersections, right? Because neighbors can come outside, and if there is a value system that says I am because we are Ubuntu, right? Like we are one, then that connection allows for all of us to feel that interdependent responsibility. And I think that speaks to very similarly that, as you were just describing, I think so eloquently, the value that we hold for ourselves, the actual value of our bodies, right? And in the systems that we operate within, right, which are not communal. We operate in an individualistic society that says the individual is the problem, right,
Mhm.
or the problem that you have in your body is your defect.
Mhm.
So the malady, right, the dis-ease, the imbalance that exists within your body is from you, not held by the larger systems, not held by the larger community. And therefore, you must be fixed or disposed of, removed. And that can show up in a whole lot of different ways, right? Whether we're talking about some
Prison,
form of prison, incarceration, whether we're talking about some form of
hospitalization.
hospitalization. And then also, I think there's an imprisonment of medication. Or within medication. And I think that as someone who has been on all the medicines and who knows that Western medical doctors are trained to prescribe medicine. Like
Mhm.
that is, I remember my godmother's a physician's assistant. She's also a pharmacologist and like has played both roles, right? And for years she's retired,
Mhm.
sort of. She's like Michael Jordan. She's just like never knows how to be retired. But I remember I
She
was
shouldn't
talking to her
retire.
what'd you say?
You shouldn't retire. What's this
Exactly. No,
retirement?
she just shouldn't. So she doesn't. So she's just like, but now she's like taking these volunteer jobs. I'm like, that's a job. They call you a volunteer because they're not paying you, but that's actually a job. But the the conversation we were having, I remember there was some ailment, right? And I was just like, I went to the doctor. I was so frustrated. And I was telling her how annoyed I was and how I was being gaslit by the doctors because they're like, yeah, I know you think that, there might be a connection to maybe what you're eating, and or that there might be you're basically, they were getting annoyed with me for asking systemic questions. Like whenever I would ask them, like, so do you think there's any other reason why, like, I might have this pain in my ankle other than the way that I've been walking or my shoes? Like, I feel like maybe there's something else going on. And while I'm trying to get their validation, because I didn't trust myself yet enough, and my body, while I'm trying to get their validation because of their professional expertise, my godmother was like, the doctors are trained to prescribe medicine, Erin. Like, that's, if there's no medicine to give you, they don't have anything to tell you. They will tell you that. And that was just like completely, utterly shocking for me. But when I think about how easy it was or has been for me to just accept medications, and I'm not judging myself. I when I say just accept, I justly accepted that medication because at the time that was all I knew, and that was what I believed. I didn't have the viewpoint that there were larger or systemic forces, that not that I was a victim or not that I didn't have agency. And I want to go, that's like coming back to something you brought up in the very beginning, right? When we were talking about, astrology. While I may not have had a systemic worldview, a cultural and communal worldview, a spiritual worldview about my wellness, my health, um, because of that, it was easy for me to say, yes, please give me this pill. And rather than investigating what might be the other areas of my life, whether it's generational, relational, interpersonal, whether it is related to social and emotional stress, whether it is related to what I'm actually eating, or back to, I think, what I think is so important about Ayurveda, one of the many things, the routine. What am I digesting, ingesting, taking in, consuming beyond what I put in my mouth? But what am I witnessing every day? What am I, to your point, when I think about addiction, I had an addiction to CNN from 2016 to 2020. I had a little brief hiatus when right after the election, I was like, I'm finished with everyone. No more. I'll never watch this again. I'll never watch the news again. You all have failed me. The news failed me is what I lead to my head. So I'll never watch the news again because that was me trying to find a way to control my anxiety. And then what happened? We got to the very first Muslim ban. And I remember that it was like a Friday, because it was like, he used to do things on Fridays, I felt like, consistently. And so it was a Friday, I guess maybe in January or February. And I remember I was like, I'm going to turn on the news because I need to know what is happening. I just saw this alert on my phone. I'm terrified. What is happening? And from then on, it was a drug. There was something that was taking me out of my consciousness, my body. It allowed me to dissociate. It allowed me to think that there was some way that by taking in all of this terror information every day, I could control circumstances that were outside of my control. And so, and I know that I was also a part of a collective, right? There's an entire culture built around this addiction, the breaking news culture, right? And so I carried that throughout my entire pregnancy. when I think about Ayurveda and what I know now and what I didn't know being pregnant and working, and my work was focused on racial justice education.
Mhm.
And so every day, in and out, I'm talking about and teaching on the terrors that we experience in this country due to the creation of racialization and racialized capitalism every day. And then also that is like they were combative, in some ways defensive conversations. So my body was shaped like this
Mhm.
every day. And at night, when I would finish working, and I traveled every other week, I think, from like the time I was pregnant until I was 34 weeks and couldn't fly anymore. Then I was
Mhm.
taking the train to New York for
Mhm.
clients. And this was the posture for my pregnancy: bracing, defense,
Mhm.
bracing, defense, fixing. I need to fix these institutions for the bodies inside of these institutions that are being harmed.
Mhm.
This was the posture. And then at night, I would consume CNN until I fell asleep
Mhm.
with CNN on, without a sleep timer, on a cycle, feeding
Mhm.
itself. And so when I think about the that as the routine, it when I'm even talking about it now, it sounds like a death routine, right? It's like a uh that. So I think I would love to like hear your thoughts, and especially as we're talking about um our relationships, because this is what I am so committed to in all of my practice, is understanding our relationships, whether it's our relationships to ourselves, our relationships with each other. So that communal, what are the cosmologies of care, the cultures of care that are collective, and also our relationships with nature, communing with nature and spirit. So I
Mhm.
just want to pause there and see what is emerging for you.
Yeah, I mean, so first, just to kind of circle back to, Western medicine, there's a few pieces there. So one piece to consider is history, right? And history. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there's an understanding within Ayurvedic wisdom that, and the understanding of history, would be better cultivated if both like archaeology and anthropology came together to sort of like unite and create a more cohesive story.
Mm.
That's one piece. Another piece about history is understanding that, if we're looking at Western medicine and its development, it didn't develop until um, post Civil War and began with basically in pre-industrialization, there's an industrialization period, right? This is when we're talking about the rise of pioneers like Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I've gotten into a deeper fascination with learning about Rockefeller. I just found this very lengthy piece talking about the history, his lineage from his father to John D. Rockefeller to John D. Jr. Rockefeller, and just like following that, learning, more about the subtleties of what's happened in society. But, when Civil War and before that was happening in the US, you had different medical practitioners in the US. You had shamans, you had naturopaths, you had, you know, allopathic physicians, you had, um, you know, um, healers, you had Ayurvedic
Workers,
doctors.
conjurers.
Huh?
I said root workers, conjurers.
Yeah. And so in the US, people were just seeing all sorts of people that were helping people, and everyone was kind of like living in this sort of like union of like, I see a homeopath, I see a naturopath, I see this person. And it was all valid. People were like benefiting or not benefiting. But, and then like industrialization started happening after the Civil War. And then Rockefeller had this idea of sort of monopolizing and creating this like unified standardized system of care. And he developed the infrastructure of academics. There was the General Board of Education. He developed that, right? He created that format in the US, and he created the formatting of it, university, as an institution. And that word's a very alive word.
Hmm.
Institutional academics. All right. And so he created the format from that, which was rooted in some of his study of like Germanic um militarization of schooling, from military to schooling, like as a very like
Yes.
systematic sort of like cookie cutter model that they were like, let's adapt here in the US and kind of make it, these are the standards and these are the standards, and you must go, because if you don't go to these particular institutions of medical care and education, then you're falling short, and created this whole like division. um and so when you're following history, going, oh, there were all these people getting along doing their own thing medically, and then all of a sudden comes this guy that groups together with a bunch of other people to create this other institution that became the new norm and ruled out everybody else. And if it's not this, then people should get killed or hung, or it's illegalized and imprisoned and all these things. It's like, whoa, what just happened, right? Because things were kind of working fine enough. And so looking at history and seeing like what pieces developed where and when, when you look at the history of colonization and how like India was, you know, doing so many great things for thousands of years. And then, yeah, Muslim came in and invaded and took out some things that they felt were inappropriate, because any any barbaric culture that's trying to dominate will do that. But also left some interesting concepts in scientific analysis in Ayurveda, like Rasa Shastra, which is using like, it's like a alchemy. So they introduced a certain level of alchemy and like transforming like red rubies and gold mixed with arsenic into specific medicines that you can consume, that's completely bioavailable, high potency, and completely safe. Like, so they left something. Well, they took out a lot. They gutted out a lot. Then you have the English that came in and ruled for a few hundred years, and their gold standard approach to the medicine was like this idea of like allopathy. But Ayurveda was the primary healthcare system of all of India for thousands and thousands of years. The
Hmm.
English came in and said, no, no, it doesn't meet our standards, so we'll make it a secondary class system. And so if you don't have enough money, you'll just go see an Ayurvedic doctor or whatever, because you're not good enough to see our higher medical care. And then Ayurveda was not really allowed to be practiced for a very long time, and it had to be done in a hush hush. And the people were found out about, the Vaidyas, physicians of Ayurveda were found out about, they would be killed, or they would have different parts of their fingers cut off, so that they couldn't practice pulse assessment and do contact, because it's essential and like it's a tool. And so then for maybe like another 80 years or so after, when like liberation happened, India became liberated, then there was this percolation of like, oh, we want to acknowledge Ayurveda again. But there was still such a indoctrination of English culture that said, yeah, okay, well, and I'm giving you like really quick synopsis of
Yes.
because I read a lot of these studies and it's like mind blowing. And they're like, well, we'll create a curriculum called the BAMS system, which is mostly structured per Western medicine, so MD level, and we'll allow some Ayurveda into this, so that if you graduate, instead of MD, we'll create a BAMS, which is a Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery. So Ayurvedic physicians in India with BAMS are surgeons. That's just a different title, but it's interesting that they call it the Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine. And it's like, this didn't exist before English came in. This didn't exist before they said this is what we need to see happen to be legitimized, and then just kind of fast forward, this is the system that's happening, and India is becoming more and more on the horizon. People are getting more note of like the science, Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, all these things, astrology. Like there's something happening, because India has always had these riches, and we've always gone to India for these riches. Columbus was looking for black pepper, which started in India. They were like, let's go. Whoops, we landed in America. While we're here, let's conquer these Native Americans, because they're not white. So let's kind of break them down, because we know better, all these things. And everybody knows these things, and it sucks. And so fast forward to like, oh, okay, well, Ayurveda's intention is not to create this divisory context of concept. It's
Mhm.
like all different medicines play a role. And there's not one medicine that's 100% perfect. And, Western medicine is more like the child that's catching up to the other systems that have been around for thousands of years. And it's provided a lot of insight to a lot of things and helped a lot of things. I think, like, what was it? When I first started studying Ayurveda 23 years ago, 20 years ago, my teacher at the time, he said, it was biomedicine up until like the early 80s, where it was just the body was treated as parts. Liver's no good, you take it out. Kidneys are good, you take it out. You try to do this blood thing, you try to inject this thing, okay. And then it wasn't until like the development of the field of psychology that the field of psychology brought in, oh, there's a psychological component here. And so my teacher joked, so this is 2003, he said, yeah, it took him this long to get to like the idea that now there's a psychosomatic relationship to health. He's like, maybe in 20 years, which is now, and I don't know if there is a little percolation in the Western medical field of acknowledging like there's a spiritual component also, because we have this branch of functional medicine that didn't exist 15 years ago, right? Functional medicine and integrative medicine, or we're thinking about
Yes.
all these all these like terms today. It's like when you're following history and you're seeing like, oh, this is a new thing, where it's coming from, and then you get to understand and you're following it, and without being biased, right? So all this noise in the background of noise of the news and craziness of what's happening all around the world, because technology makes it that much easier. If you get to quieter places, you can see the pieces connecting and going, and you don't get disillusioned,
Yes.
right? So can make choice from a deeper place of true consciousness within you, that is your voice, that knows what is actually true, and you can filter out what is not true more easily, right? And then so we don't want to villainize Western medicine, because it is a fellow medicine in Ayurveda. It does serve a purpose, and especially in the West, where like Ayurvedic physicians are not allowed to practice unless this is the indoctrination in the US. Unless you're a medical doctor, MD, that graduated from any school that's acknowledged as an MD program in the US, or you come from another country that's taken the boards to get into the US, no other physicians technically allowed. Naturopathy was able to fight for it. Oriental doctors have fought for it, and they get their own sort of like playing field that get acknowledged. And there are Western medical doctors who are like, yeah, those doctors aren't real. I have
Mhm.
patients that come see me as their primary doctor and saying Western medicine's not real, right? It's perspective. It's each person's individual capacity. And this is why I like the movement of the Health Freedom Act, where like different states can allow people to choose who they want to see, and it's legal and it's okay and it's safe and all these things. So people can still have choice, right?
Yes.
And this is great, like, Colorado and California and New Mexico and places like that that have the Health Freedom Act. PA's in the works, but PA is always like very slow with
I was
anything.
going to say that in
But
most things.
yeah. And so, PA will eventually be, I'm confident, because I've been in Philly long enough to know, like, I've seen a lot of things that weren't okay 20 years ago. And now, like, PA is like loosening up some of its conservative reins. Um, so circling to medicine itself, like, then all the institutions and all the systems that provide medicine, of course, any, going back to, I think your aunt had said about like doctors
Yes.
prescribe, right?
Mhm.
All doctors prescribe medicine. It's the title of that doctor, it's the tradition of that doctor that determines what does that medicine look like, right? In Ayurveda, of course, we have by far more than any other system in the world, the most elaborate, complete system of like care, from understanding oils to like tinctures, sure, not so much so, not traditional Ayurveda, pills and like jams and medicated oils and ghees, and like, and those are medicines you take, different shaped pills for different reasons. Like everything in Ayurveda is done very strategically, because there's a science behind why it's there. Some are just coincidental, why that pill is oval versus round versus flat versus powder versus like it's never coincidental in Ayurveda. It's so scrutinized in a very logical way that Ayurveda has created this understanding of like, yeah, this is how you get the medicine to this person. The medicine could also be, take a good yoga class, or commune with the nature, or go to like a puja, or go to like a temple, or go to like a shrine, or go to like a church, or go to some sort, like Ayurveda. In each moment when you're meeting an Ayurvedic physician or someone that's clinically trained in Ayurveda, we have to wear a lot of hats. We have to know about meteorology and environmentalism and physics and geography and geology and geometry. Like, we have to know a lot of different things at one moment in time, because it is the world science.
That's
And it's
right.
bringing it all together. And so the medicine might be different for each person, which is one of the reasons why Western medicine has a hard time understanding and adapting Ayurveda, because it doesn't meet its gold standard model. But it's not supposed to, because the gold standard model is only a sort of myopic view of looking at certain things and making things. One of the reasons why it exists is to make things safe. That's one true argument, because we want to be safe. All doctors want to be safe as much as possible. Nobody really wants to do harm. We all take an oath as physicians not to do harm, right? So essentially all doctors and all traditions are trying to do the best that they can with what they have. And not every single doctor is going to know every single thing. Not even like the most advanced Ayurvedic physician that's been around for 100 years. Like, because there are Ayurvedic physicians that are around 100 years, that are 100
Yes.
years old. Like,
Yes.
and I've met a couple and I've heard of a couple. And so it's like, and that wealth of wisdom is like, it's a saturation, and it's amazing. If you have that Native American tribesman that's sort of like the medicine man that's been around for like 90 years, and he knows like the different directions by putting his finger outside going, this is what it's going to look like today.
Yes.
To like, let me look at the stars and see the astrology from that point in time, like, so everyone's going to have a development over time. That's the cultivation of the system. And you determine in each moment that you're interacting with each patient, what is the medicine that it's the right medicine? And you hope that it's the right medicine as best as possible. But that hope is not just rooted in some sort of fantastical like idea of like, I'll just pick this and see this.
Mhm.
No, you're going through like almost innumerable calculations in your head to the best of your capacity to see like, is this the right thing? Why is the right thing? How do I know it's the right thing? Is it absolutely da 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 da? What do I expect to see from it? If it's not working, what do I see from it? Like, there's so many things going on in one fraction of a second when you're making that choice. Pretty much any doctor picking any medicine, And in Ayurveda, it's like, yeah, maybe this pill isn't going to be the right pill. Maybe we need to do some sort of like ritual, because maybe there's some sort of ancestral corruption that's caused this karmic fluctuation that's created this health that's this ripple in time. And what do we do with that? Like, and that's where like the astrology can come back, if we're coming back around to the astrology piece. Like, sometimes when we don't figure things out from the Ayurvedic perspective directly, we integrate it, because it's an integrative system. It can look at astrology and go, this is what's happening, and this is a bigger karmic thing. And so then we need to sort of like address that too. It's never a one size fits all kind of thing. It's never a one size fits all. That's why Ayurveda, Eastern medicine in general as a whole, and I speak for all the Eastern medicine that's outside of the paradigm of the Western allopathic model and scientific current study, isn't going to fit into, one size fits all.
That's right.
It has to have its own inherent structure. And so there's a large body of research and science being done now in India to create that own standard that will be parallel to what we think is the gold standard approach, that can rectify like, why is this medicine working? What are we looking at? Using all the, amazing mumble jumble high-end vocabulary to define, the analysis and the perception and things, using things that are like going to be relatable in that language, because that's the bridge. Language is the bridge.
Yes,
right? It's what you say and how you say it, right? So in Ayurvedic, we can't talk Ayurvedic terms with Western medical doctor. We have to find terms that they will understand to the best capacity of conveying the information to create that bridge, because it's about union. And the reality is too, when a patient comes in, it's not like which system is better. It's more like, because sometimes some systems are better than others. Like Western medicine, for the most part, is best at emergency. That's one of the best things. There was also an understanding that Ayurveda is also good at emergencies. We just do it differently, but we can manage emergencies and do things like that. But it's more about interacting with each other on an equal playing field to support the best interest of the patient in their highest good, which is their health and well-being. That's the bigger message here, not this competition of like, one versus the other, you're no good and this is no good. It's like, no, we don't have time for that, because it's that mentality that we go through history for thousands and thousands and thousands of years of like, all this imprisonment and all the slavery and all these things. That's one of the foundations to that mentality, right? It's like, I'm better than you. I have
That's
the
right.
right to do this. And so if you're not conforming to me, then I will break you. And instead of like, no, we can all get along, we can all make this work, because the best interest is the betterment of the person, the betterment of our culture, the betterment of our community, the betterment of our ecosystem, local and environment, and the world. Like, that's how that ripple will affect, because right now this harmony of that is showing very evidently on the volatility of the weather that we see, that's more extreme now than it's ever been in 30 years, and it's going to progress.
Yes, it
This is
is.
the thing, it is going to progress, where we don't have the power to control that, you know, level 5 hurricane. But I'm sure scientists in NASA are trying to figure that out too. And that's okay, because when you mess up the course of nature in its own natural time, you create a new timeline, you create more disharmony. And when we're consumed and we're the only things to go, and nature's like, bye. We don't want humans on this planet anymore. We're done.
That's
and
right.
and it will always win. It's going to be around much longer than we are, for certain.
There's something that I will do often is, as I'm listening, I will keep hearing these like essential themes, but I'm also hearing spirit. Like, there's just like confirmation, 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 confirmation. um and so, and like uh deep gratitude. And so one of these essential themes, right, that you were talking about was um the intention, and the intention to the intention that is set for holistic transformation, and that um and then the humility, coming back to the humility, right, that exists in Ayurveda, even as Ayurveda is saying we need to figure out a way to take the brilliance of this system, this life system, this system for life, um and uh, allow it to be able to communicate with the system of dominance and hegemony that has been put in place to supersede it, still trying to find a way. I'm going to just talk through this, you follow me for a second, like, but
Yeah,
find
yeah.
a way to say, um uh we are not in opposition, right? We are not in opposition. The greater purpose is the evolution, and the healing and transformation of all of these interconnected ecosystems. And so our ability to communicate, and our ability to share the wisdom that we've been had, and y'all decided to diminish it, and now you want some of it, or now there is awareness that, again, especially coming out of a global pandemic, that um, completely turned Western medicine on its head. And so to say, oh, um, you know, or not even to say, I'd say, for Ayurveda as that life system, to be able to communicate with Western medicine in its sort of fragmented parts, that there's still such humility, right, that exists there. And it's the same humility that recognizes that nature takes all. Nature is all, right? Nature is going to do what it's going to do, regardless of
Yeah,
whatever we think we have the capacity to control.
yeah,
And so, as I think about um, sort of that big theory, or not theory, theme, if you will, it's really like there's so many connections that I am also seeing, right, to not only these larger transpersonal questions of how we bring systems of life to interact with systems of destruction when they are seen as the dominant monosystem. And that it's beyond that question of the sort of binary question that I think that from, at least from like my background is politics and government, which I'm not poo-pooing. It's great. I have those BA and I have those degrees, right? I have the master's and at the same time, that has not been that there is an evolution to my understanding around my purpose work in terms of transformation, justice, and healing.
Yeah.
And when I recognize that I do have this knowledge and awareness of political strategy and how systems are structured and how people move and manipulate those systems, or bend them to their will. And you were talking about the Rockefellers. We have to come back to that. But this this is a time we are in a major period of transition. I mean, transformation. And I think, we were talking about the astrology earlier. We're in what some people say is the dawn of the age of the Aquarius. We're in definitely in Pluto is in Aquarius and will be for the next 20 years. And so this idea that we are at the precipice. Like if we think, I'm like, the last 6 months have been a lot. Well, the next 20 years are going to change the trajectory. As you said, we're in a new timeline.
Yeah.
And so when I think about that, I'm going to make a pivot. I'm thinking about the gut. I'm thinking about digestion and how Ayurveda views digestion as transformation. And I have, when I first started studying Ayurveda, a few years ago, before I started seeing you, that went off like light bulbs. And I was like, oh, I've got to talk to Dr. Antonia about this because we talk about this all the time. So I'd love it as we're like coming up on time, maybe to like dig into digestion as transformation.
Yeah, I mean, Ayurveda looks at digestion on many different levels because, Ayurveda is that total, right? So it's the digestion of the physical matter that we ingest through the mouth, the orifice that brings the nutrients into the tissues and goes through the alimentary canal and goes through all the different organs and then makes its way through the tissues. There's the sensory experience of the 5 senses that are digesting information, and if we want to touch on this briefly, one of the causes of disease is under the category of what's called asat mendriyartha samyoga, which is like the misuse of the senses. So there's overuse, underuse, and misuse in general, and then proper use. And so it's like, what are we looking at? What are we listening to? What are we smelling? What are we tasting? What are we touching? And that goes in so many different directions, from like, what things are we listening to in our environment, in our home, and who's living there? What are they saying? What are the words that are spoken? The things that we see that could also be within the context of our home. And what do we see around us? Are there natural elements? Are we surrounded by plastic furniture only? Are we surrounded by like synthetic things? What are we smelling? Are we using like, I know people love this, like, like what is it, Everglade kind of sprays and things like
Oh,
that,
the
and
Febreze.
Febreze stuff and all these other things that you plug in,
Oh, the plugins.
and
Oh.
it is so chemical. And I'm like, of course you're being inundated with poison, right? And all these things that are not in alignment with natural organic materials that appease the senses will be a contribution through poisonous actions, and you're giving the body more stress. What you're putting in your mouth, all the different foods, is it healthy and clean, and does it have more growth hormone hormone, and does it have any pesticides and insecticides? And of course the body's taking that in. Your basic tap water has poisons automatically in it, even though you're thinking of going through this filtration system through the water reservoirs and all these things. Like, no, you have to really think and use the mind and see like what's really happening in these things. And what are you putting on your skin from like the clothes that is almost becoming obsolete? You can't find cotton fibers anymore. Everything has some sort of element of plastic, and we're surrounded by plastic, touching plastic, and all these plastics, and they're plastic, and And so the body has a lot to digest. And so in the context of like what's happening globally, you say we're coming out of this global pandemic, and that's referring to COVID. COVID is the least of the problems. We have many more.
Come on now.
We have many more problems that would be like COVID and worse than COVID coming.
Right.
It has been foretold, and what's been foretold has come true every time and continuously. This is how we know the karna karya, which is cause and effect. And so as long as we are disharmonious with nature, of course we're going to have more viruses being released from wherever they were dormant, and whether glaciers are melting or from some sort of fracking, or from, of course, like, this is not rocket science. But if people think they need the rocket science to see this, or they want to put blinders on because they feel disabled and disenabled, okay, that's a whole different other reality. I mean, Martin Luther King spoke about complacency being one of the worst poisons in society. But anyways, we won't go off on that tangent, right? I love Martin Luther King. Anyways, so digestion is being inundated every day from our daily experiences to what we're listening to and all the senses and everything I just said. And of course, it's going to cause a lot of indigestion, a lot of people getting more digestive issues, more celiacs, which can be genetically inherited. But what was the parent's stress level? What was the genetic heritage? Like, there's so many pieces here. It's never just like a quick, easy answer. And Ayurveda can explain so much of it. And that's why, like in Western medicine, when a patient comes to me, they say, yeah, my doctor's tried all these things, and they said, good luck, try to find something that will help you. Ayurveda can usually make more sense of it anytime, because it looks at a broader picture. It has a sort of macro and micro capacity to observe information coming in, not just micro, not just because someone lived in a house that had like asbestos or lead being flaked through the paint. Of course, go bigger. What's the community like? What's the quality of air like? What's the earth like? What's the soil, the water, the fire? What are we seeing? We're getting all this smoke, more and more smoke these days. And all of this is adding. So we're paying attention and using clear mind to keep track of this historically. We can see, like, how did we arrive to today? It's not just coincidental. We didn't just fall into COVID pandemic. This is coming for a long time, and we have a lot of things that are percolating and moving forward. And the global pandemic is the bigger issue, which is beyond COVID and other things like that. Is these 5-stage hurricanes and these 7-level earthquakes, and
The floods.
and the flooding, and the volcanoes consuming, and the fires, and all this is only going to increase. The earth is heating up. We are not in a place where we're going to be cooling it down anytime soon, right? And so what consciousness do we have to put in place to really interact with our day-to-day, and also like put our energies in the direction of those places that are trying to create some movement, right? The environmental movement, the EPA, that's been around for over 30 years. They've been saying this for a long time. Now it's like, now you're listening to us. We told you guys back then what needed to be done back then. If we had done what we're doing now as a globe, and the US is very slow compared to other countries, in the 80s, we wouldn't be having this conversation about this kind of stuff. But no, right? Because no one wanted to believe in environmental sciences. They said, it's a bunch of hippies just learning something about the earth and, acid rain. Well, yeah, that was just the beginning of it. Things like acid rain should have been more like, whoa, we need to stop this right now. All right.
Right.
And so we have to digest all of this. And Ayurveda is saying more than ever now, these times a year when we're transitioning from one season to the other, as one season is changing its climate to the next climate, inherently by design, has been around for since the beginning of time before us. If we are aligned with proper cleansing, if we're aligned with properly supporting digestion, which is why cleansing is put in place to support digesting of the previous experience, yesterday's experience, summer experience, to today's experience going into tomorrow, which is fall, then winter, when you're removing the excess load that the body has to consume instead of overeating, the cleansing process that's done very strategically in Ayurveda. It's not just doing a kidney flush or a gallbladder flush. Ayurveda doesn't really take that stuff as seriously. Like, it's not proper science based on Ayurvedic wisdom, like what you're trying to do, what's the end goal, what's the bigger picture. Is it harmful? Sometimes it can be. If someone's like trying to do a quick liver flush or gallbladder flush, if their other systems are not able to handle it, you're just moving sludge around one way to another place. You're just relocating it from like the liver, gallbladder to somewhere else, like the spleen or pancreas, right? So if the systems are working properly at any point in time, and Ayurveda supports this, it'll process the experience fully. You don't get indigestion from the experience, right? If you're limiting how much TV you're consuming a day, or in watching what the quality of the TV that you're watching is, or you're listening to, or who you're surrounding yourself with, or what you're putting on your skin, then you can allow your body's capacity to digest things more easily.
Mm.
And illness isn't as um, guaranteed in a lot of those cases if those things are maintained. But we're all overwhelmed, and then we have our listening to like things that just confuse us more. We don't make the proper choices, right? That goes into the other concept of Ayurveda, of how disease forms, called pranya parada, which means misuse of intelligence, knowing what's right and choosing what's wrong. Oh, I have a cold, but I'm craving pizza, so I'm gonna have a cold anyways. I don't care. I'm just gonna eat the pizza. Why is my cold lasting longer? You know?
Yes.
And it's like, no, have your soup when you're not feeling well. It's like, use your, Ayurveda says buddhi, which is intelligence, and say, yeah, it's like, I'm coming off this cleanse I just did, seasonal cleanse, really deep. And of course, my mind is like, oh, I can't wait to have a Nutella sandwich because I'm Italian. I love it. And then I'm like, I can't wait to have the organic version of Pringles, which I just found out about right before my cleanse. I was like, I'm excited about, like,
Don't tell me anything about that.
yeah. And so I was like, my mind creates a list of like all the things, and I'm like, oh, I could just have one little bite of that. It's not going to really hurt my process. And I started, like, there was this inner voice that goes, "You're so funny, Antonio. You think you're dying. It's only been like a couple days that you have been without the stuff. Like, you think you can wait a couple more days. You're good." I'm like, that's true. you know, but it's like, how many people would falter and go, I'm just gonna have that bite, but that throws off the cleanse, and then that this undoes a lot of things, right? Just wait. Strong mind. The strong mind is very important to have, because if not, it's the thing that will make more chaos, and then the body will follow, and it will follow suit. And then we're wondering why the body is unhealthy. We're making choices from a crazy mind. We can't trust this crazy mind. It's like listening to that person on Broad Street who's like walking around with a sign, bantering and yelling crazy words, and you're either going to listen to her and go, "Ooh, she has a great philosophy. I should just listen to what she's saying, and I'm going to take in what she's saying." Or say, "No, that's just one of those voices that you just acknowledge, you namaste, and just keep walking," instead of taking that into your consciousness and digesting it into your body, making that you. No, it's okay. The mind is going to be crazy, and then you just keep cultivating it. But we're so disjointed, we're so distracted. The mind is like going from one thing to the other now, faster than it's been before. We have all these screens to look at, all these things to keep track of, all these things that confuse us, all these things. Of course, someone's going to make a clear choice, and then we won't know who to vote for.
Or we won't know who to vote for. We might not vote.
Why not
We
vote? Complacency.
right.
Complacency. Like Martin
Um,
Luther King said, complacency is the root cause of evil. It's not
um,
good.
and we'll be terrorized. I think that there's so much there, and I know we're at time. We are going to do this again because
Yeah.
because oh my gosh, I just have to say, like, just on that last part, I was like, oh, I have to rewatch this and come back and follow up because there were so many, and I was like, I'm intentionally not taking notes. I write everything down, and I've been in a practice of just being in full presence.
Mhm.
And so luckily I also have a transcription so I can come back. But I
Yeah.
just wanted to be in the conversation with you today instead of feeling beholden to all of my prep notes that I wrote, because I did write, like, I had a whole agenda and like a whole bunch of questions and with like a specific order. And I can send them to you, but it doesn't matter. This is what we were supposed to have. And there's so much, like, oh gosh, there's so much good, like, amazing, juicy, awesome fruit here. Um, so much. And we could do a whole season off of this. No, seriously, we
Okay.
could, we can. Um, and I also just there was so much that I was also processing for myself. Like, there were so many lessons, messages that were shooting up and emerging. And I've been spending a lot of time with digestion, what you talked about right now, and I think I told you about the podcast that I was listening to, Embodied Astrology,
Mhm.
and the specific Virgo season readings. We're coming back to astrology to close, but I think that there's so much alignment with everything that you just shared about our digestion on the um the personal, and then even within the personal, right, within the psychological, or the psychic, um and the physical, somatic, and the idea, right, because it's an idea that was planted in our heads that we are separate in
Mhm.
order to allow, like, put us in line with a system that keeps us separate.
Mhm.
And so the that separation, um, which also then tells us we are quote unquote crazy when we, or the way that when we are told, oh, that's just psychosomatic, right? That
Mhm.
that was actually, I mean, I think up until, at least for me in life, up until probably a few years ago, if someone said something was psychosomatic, it meant it wasn't real.
Mhm.
It meant it was in your head. You'd made it
Yeah,
up
it's a
from,
gaslighting.
it's a gaslight, right? And for, the thing that I have learned the most about gaslighting is you cannot be gaslit when you are aligned with source,
Oh
when
yeah,
you know yourself,
yeah,
right, deeply, your true
yeah,
self, not again that person
yeah.
who's standing on Broad Street, who's she's in my head, by the way. Luckily I spend enough time with myself that I know when she's talking. I'm like, similarly, girl, you need to go sit down somewhere. I can say that to her, but I know when she's coming. Here she comes.
Yeah, like zip
I
it.
know, right? Like, no. And so I just want to amplify that's happening on the personal, full embodied level, and then also on the interpersonal and the transpersonal, our relationships with the earth, right, and with the natural world, and the ways in which we have been gaslit into believing we are disconnected,
Yeah.
um, and disconnected from this wisdom, for our collective healing that's always been here. So
Mhm.
I just want to, like, from the bottom of my heart and soul, thank you, for saying, Erin, come on, because we've been talking about this for a year, and thank you for every day in every way, because you're actually the voice in my head when I'm about to make the wrong decision, that I know when I know I'm wrong, I'm like, oh girl, don't do that, but it's funny. I'll say, Erin, that's not, you can do it, but that's not going to work for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, so when I trust, not when I trust, when I recognize the fire that is burning in my body, when I understand the difference between good inflammation and bad inflammation, right? That it's not all bad. All fire ain't bad in the body, right? That is because of a daily, minute by minute actual practice that I have been cultivating in my work with you. So I just want to continue to thank you, and also to continue this conversation series with you.
Yeah, I would love that. It'd be great. And then I guess, I mean, do it. This is where I do the plug in of like if people are interested in working with me as a clinician.
Oh yeah. So
That
I want you to talk about how they can work with you, how they can find you. And then in our next conversation, or yeah, what I'd like to do is actually talk about how, like, who you are and how you've
okay.
come to this journey. Yeah, your path,
Yeah,
because
that's
that
great.
is an amazing story. And
That'd
so
be that'd be fun. Yeah. So I mean, for
uh,
now, I guess while we close out, people can contact me at stillpointayurveda.com, and then all the information's there as far as how to reach me, the location, all those things that you need to get in touch with me, including the phone number that you can use to call to schedule your appointment. And then once you contact me, we schedule your appointment, the journey starts that day.
literally, there are no coincidences that I got COVID 2 weeks after I signed up to work with you. And also it was the transformational moment of my life, and likely also it is healing my lineage forwards and backwards and across
Mhm.
space time. So
Yes.
I hope that if anyone is interested, they would contact Dr. Antonio Aragona, who is an incredible doctor of Ayurveda here in Philly, but also I had wonderful virtual appointments with him as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I do virtual telehealth around the world. I have patients in India and California and Colorado, and yeah. So where there's this is the benefit of technology.
yes. Oh my gosh, I have the best therapist I've ever had in my life for 3 years because of telehealth, because of COVID. Thank you,
Yeah,
COVID.
yeah. The little gems in disguise.
Okay, well, Dr. A, we will continue. I will see you on Friday.
Yeah.
And I am again so grateful for you, for your time, for your brilliance, for the fact we both wore red today.
Yes,
Um,
that's true. Well,
and
thank you for
yeah,
honoring my by having me on this, and I'm honored by you by having this experience with you and journey of health and well-being and sharing this wisdom that is not my Ayurveda. It's just something that just keeps coming through me. It's a pay it forward kind of thing, right?
it
So
is your purpose path. We've
the more
talked
I
about, we will
learn, the
talk more
more
about your purpose path, but you are
yeah.
walking your purpose, and that is why you are so incredibly gifted. I thank you.
Well, thank you. And then I'll get a copy of this. I can share this with
Yes,
people.
yes, yes.
That's great.
All right. All right. I look forward to talking
Blessings.
with
I'll
you
talk to you
again.
soon.
Okay.
Yes. Be
Bye bye.
well.
So this has been our first recording of the Black Mama Body podcast with Erin Trent Johnson. And that was my guest, Dr. Antonio Aragona, who is a doctor of Ayurveda at Still Point Ayurveda, based here in Philadelphia, and again, working with bodies and spirits globally. I'm going to say I love y'all and be well.